Welcome back, everyone, to the Crash the Pond podcast. It is a rare but mighty Thursday edition of the pod, March 13th. Post trade deadline, lot to get to, lot to talk about today. Jake is alive and with us.
I am. Thank you so much for bearing with us. I apologize. I know that this is always a huge week for us with the trade deadline being last Friday. In an ideal world, we would have recorded either last Sunday or last Monday, but I got sick and I was in rough shape. So thank you all for bearing with us through this, and we're going to give you a really fun show tonight instead.
Yeah, we're gonna hit a lot of different topics, and I'm just gonna jump right into a statement. Is that okay?
Okay. Sure.
Just this is just me
Sure.
looking at the chat, and something I try not to do too much of as we record the podcast. But someone said the team is worse without Brian Dumoulin, and I did a quick check, and the Ducks 5v5 numbers are actually better since the Dumoulin trade than they are on the season. So. False. Team is not worse without Dumoulin.
Yeah.
Anyway,
It's also a small sample.
yes.
Small sample, goaltending, different things like that. Not saying the goaltending's been bad, but variations with shooting percentage.
You are the quickest to blame goalies of people I know.
I am not. I think the
will
goaltending's been good.
I will say that. You are
wow.
a goalie.
Wow.
You are hard on goalies. You have a high standard.
I do, but in some ways it's because at a certain point you just have to make a save.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean that is indeed the
Yeah.
call of the position is to make saves. It's very binary. So we're going to break down the trade deadline that was for the
Yeah.
Ducks. By now, most people know what has happened, but maybe they don't know our takes. And really simple, really not a busy trade deadline. The Ducks only made 2 trades and really only one that was actually noteworthy. They traded Brian Dumoulin a week ago to the New Jersey Devils. They retained 50% of his contract for Herman Traff, a prospect, and a conditional second rounder, which is going to be the better of Edmonton or Winnipeg second rounders this season in this draft. So, Brian Dumoulin gone, logjam fixed. Your reaction?
Hallelujah. The logjam is finally fixed. I mean, we talked about it on this podcast way back when they first made the Trouba trade, that they needed to move Fowler, and then they also then needed to move Brian Dumoulin to clear things up, because at that point in time, like, it seemed like there would be a logjam. And lo and behold, like, the comments from Pat Verbeek kind of laid that out there, that he did view the logjam, did view it being detrimental to these players. We'll get into that a bit more, but this was a deal that needed to happen. It needed to clear up the space for these young players to start playing more, playing in more important situations, not being out every other game, not sitting in. I mean, Verbeek even said these guys sitting for a week was messing with their confidence, messing with their play. Like, it was pretty obvious that was happening. And so this overall, from a long-term perspective, needed to happen. And I think the return's pretty good. I mean, the Ducks ended up paying a 4th-round pick to get Brian Dumoulin, and then they flip him for a 2nd-round pick at a prospect who could maybe be something, maybe a bottom 6, if anything. So a very Verbeek-esque prospect, but still very nice and tidy piece of work by Pat Verbeek.
Yeah, so this is from the Elite Prospects Draft Guide in Traff's draft year. The elevator pitch for Herman Traff. A big-bodied winger who can challenge defenders with his impressive speed, lacks higher-end instincts and playmaking touch. He is a winger, 6'3", 203 pounds, right shot. Kind of projects as a bottom 6 potential grinder type, but with some speed. So can never have too many of those guys, and if he can develop some playmaking touch, then that'll be really helpful. But yeah, getting a prospect who's just not a throwaway. I think Herman Traff has a decent chance of being an NHLer, plus a pick for a rental is pretty unusual. In most years, a Brian Dumoulin type player gets you maybe a 3rd rounder, maybe just a conditional 2nd. And yet, because of this year where so many teams are in the playoff mix, including the Ducks, well, they were in the playoff mix. We'll get into that. But it became a seller's market, and Pat Verbeek cashed in on that. So I do think that it's interesting because on one hand, I think that this is just a great trade on its face. I think
Yeah.
that it is a great asset play. They got Brian Dumoulin as a flyer, and they recuperate they better assets for him. I also think that it solves the logjam, which is really important, like you already addressed, getting playing time for Olin Zellweger, who prior to the Dumoulin trade had been scratched 5 games in a row, which is just bad. And Pat Verbeek even said that it had become a problem. Now, what's interesting is just trying to understand the rationale behind Pat Verbeek's decision. Because if you read and listen to his comments, because Pat Verbeek spoke a lot after the deadline, he made the decision after the Vancouver game prior to the deadline. And it almost sounds as if maybe this trade doesn't happen if the Ducks win those games and are in a playoff position. We'll never know. There's no way of really knowing. But it does sound like the outcomes of those games before the deadline at least had some effect on his decision-making. And
yeah,
I'm curious for your take on that.
It feels like he's speaking out of both sides of his mouth, is quite frankly how it feels, because I think on one hand, I get that. Like, yes, I think Brian Dumoulin was a steadying presence on the blue line. Like, I think he was a good player for this team. I don't think like he was an anchor or anything like that. But I think if you as the GM are coming out and saying, as he did on the Beaker podcast, that that Minchikov and Zellweger sitting for weeks on end like was not good for their confidence and hurt their play overall. And then on the flip side of that, talking about potentially extending Brian Dumoulin and wrestling with moving him, like what was it here then? Was it actually a logjam and you thought it was a situation that you had to fix, or was it about extending Brian Dumoulin? Because those two thoughts are very counterintuitive. And so I think that is my frustration here overall, is that, okay, like if your view of this was that this was a situation that was making a negative impact overall on these young guys, like this should have been addressed months ago at this point in time. And instead it was let to fester, let to linger, and have these young guys not play and hurt their confidence, hurt this season for them. And then you potentially want to extend Brian Dumoulin. You talk about potentially going back to him in the offseason. So it's like, okay, what's happening here then? Like, it just feels like there's no actual framework for it. It just feels like there isn't actually like a plan for how this blue line is supposed to go.
Yeah, so I think that Pat Verbeek said that they did discuss an extension, and I think that it's hard to really. That's why I only read into those comments so much, because he talked about wanting to extend him. He talked about maybe circling back. I do think that part of that is just playing up the. I don't want to call it a narrative, because it's true that they really valued Brian Dumoulin. They didn't want to get rid of him, and you're also kind of talking to your team a little bit there, because the Ducks are in a playoff mix, and you trade a minute munching, top pairing defenseman, and that's probably kind of a tough pill to swallow for the team. And so I think you have to dress it up a little bit, even for your fans. You don't want to make it seem like you're selling. So that's why it's kind of hard to draw like a perfect logic through it, because it's a lot of just fluff. I do think my own personal opinion is that at the end of the day, they traded him, and actions speak louder than words. If they really, really wanted to chase down a playoff spot, they would have kept him. But instead, they did trade him. And so we can argue about the reasoning, and I think that that's an important thing to talk about. But at the end of the day, they did it. They pulled the trigger, and now Olin Zellweger is playing a bunch. I
think in reality, what the question I have is what's going to happen this offseason, like based on these statements. I think that, like you said, actions speak louder than words. He did trade him. The question is going to be, okay, if he does make it to UFA status, does he sign him? If he does, then what happens? Like, where does this go from there?
Well, I think broader point, but the Ducks are going to have a lot of defensemen to sort through this summer. And I just have a hard time imagining that they're going to redo the Logjam season 2. I don't think anyone's streaming that series for a second part. So, and then any other thoughts on the Dumoulin trade? Any thoughts on Brian Dumoulin's legacy? Team DJ?
No, I think he was one of the better defensemen that the Ducks have gotten in this little stretch of having kind of 1 year, one-off defensemen. Better than Klingberg, better than Kulikov, better than Lyubushkin. Like, he was one of the better one-off defensemen that they've had over this period of time.
What would you put the probability that he comes back this summer?
30%.
Yeah, I'd put it between 10 to 30. I think it's just very unlikely. Also, I guess the Ducks can pay him whatever he wants because they're cap space, but I
Yeah.
feel like he'll be able to get a pretty good contract with the whole rising cap situation.
Yep.
So with the Dumoulin trade, that did leave the Ducks with just 6 defensemen. And so they then traded with the New York Islanders. They sent over future considerations to the Islanders in exchange for Oliver Shillington, who in the past has had really good seasons, but has, had off-ice struggles. Now is more of a depth guy, AHL guy, and so comes in, clear-cut seventh defenseman. Nothing that Pat Verbeek said when he was asked about him would change that thought, and so all sights are set on Olin Zellweger getting regular playing time down the stretch.
Yep. Yep. And so I think, yeah, there were some questions when they first made the move for Shillington of, is there a new logjam? No.
No.
Verbeek
Look at his
said,
games played.
Well, yeah, and Verbeek said it himself. Like, this is a trade for a seventh defenseman. They got him in case someone gets hurt. They don't have to call guys up from the AHL. They can just let him play.
Yeah, and I really it's funny because Verbeek was kind of trying to play up Shillington's past because he had that one really good season in Calgary. It's almost like, wait a second, like I still brought in a decent player, but yeah, like you can't say the point of this Dumoulin trade was to let the kids play and then bring in someone who would shuffle that up right away. So yeah, purely a depth piece, and since he's been acquired, he hasn't played. So how many games do you think he'll play as a Duck?
2.
2? Okay. I'll take the over. I'll go 3. How about that? How about that? But yeah, that was the trade deadline. And as opposed to years past where we have multiple deals to kind of get through and dissect, the Ducks were very quiet. No John Gibson trade, no Trevor Zegras trade, no Ryan Strome trade.
We should mention, I think probably what put the kibosh on a John Gibson deal, because actually Elliot Friedman today on Light the Lamp had mentioned that if he thinks that the Ducks have one regret, it's not moving John Gibson, just to kind of make this thing end and kind of stop it lingering so much. But I think that John Gibson got hurt last week. What was it, in the Edmonton game, right?
Yeah.
And I think that probably was a sign of a deal not happening, because the big question mark was about his health.
Yes, and I'm curious, do you think that if he doesn't get hurt that John Gibson gets dealt at the deadline?
I don't know.
It's still unclear.
It's still unclear. I think if he would have come out of Four Nations and been healthy, I think it's likely he would have gotten dealt. But the fact that he had 2 injuries in the short amount of time.
Do you think he gets dealt this summer?
I don't know.
Because the way
so.
Elliot Friedman was talking about it on Light the Lamp made it sound like this is something that both sides want to get done at some point.
I think so. I think it's probably a draft day deal.
Yeah. And I mean, at that point, John Gibson will have 2 years left on his contract. So
yeah.
I think that makes it an easier pill to swallow. It's crazy because we talk about John Gibson as this, like, I mean, he's played a lot. I mean, what is he? He had his recent 500th game or something like that. He's 31. Like, he's not ancient.
No.
He's still, I mean, health aside, he's still, I mean, he's having a great season. I think he's still got like 4 to 5 years left of solid goaltending. Goalies age really weirdly, where goalies can have kind of a nice run in their early to mid 30s. So I don't know, like his next contract is not going to be what it was on this contract, but I think he's still got some good hockey left in him, and I have no clue what the Ducks can get for him this summer if they trade him, but we'll just have to find out. Outside of that, I think that the biggest regret for the Ducks is just that this was clearly a seller's market. You saw players, rentals, non-rentals, fetch crazy prices, and it makes you wonder why the Ducks didn't feel the need to get in on that. Like, for example, you look at a player like Ryan Strome, or even, I mean, I know he's the captain, but Radko Gudas, players who have a little bit of term left, but who a contending team would want. And in this market probably might get you a roster player back and picks, like could actually get you a solid return. How do you grade that? I guess, how do you grade this deadline overall?
I think this deadline's probably a solid C. Like,
Okay,
Verbeek did
interesting.
what he needed to do. He moved Brian Dumoulin, cleared up the logjam. I don't think he did anything above and beyond whether it would be making a move. I mean, supposedly, I guess he asked about Rantanen, but didn't really go anywhere.
Yeah, go ahead.
But my point, he didn't make any like big swing like that at the deadline where he was going and getting a guy like that, going and getting a Pettersson. He wasn't moving a Radko Gudas for an exorbitant price. He wasn't moving a Ryan Strome for an exorbitant price. Like, he did what the deal that he needed to do and didn't really do anything more. I don't know if that deserves more than a C, personally. And that's not necessarily meant to be a negative. A C is average on this grading curve that I'm giving. So yeah, that's where I grade it.
I might go a little higher, maybe up to B minus, C plus, just because, yeah, like it's an average deadline. He did what he needed to do. He fixed a problem.
Yeah.
The problem was also self-created, so it's
Yep.
like it's hard to give it much beyond that. But it was just fine work. It was fine
Yep.
work. If Traff ever becomes something, then great. But you also get a second rounder, which you can maybe flip again. Or I mean, we've seen with second rounders. I mean, there's good players that come out
Yeah.
of the second round. Jackson Lacombe,
Tristan Leno.
yeah, well, no comment on Tristan Leno.
Okay.
But what was I gonna say? Shoot. There was a player I wanted to talk about. This is really embarrassing. Oh yeah, the Rantanen thing. So there was a whole thing about how the Ducks called on Rantanen, and I don't even know where it came from. It was like
LeBrun.
yeah.
On the Athletic Hockey Show, I guess. I haven't heard it, but that's where it was mentioned.
This is just a call to action, or I guess a call to inaction. Can we stop making headlines about a GM calling on a player? Because there was a good rant about this on the PDO cast last week, which is that the GMs literally have a group chat. Like, asking about a player could literally just be a text. And it's like, how much do you really... Like, we don't know whether it's like a bona fide offer, a text of, hey, you up? Like, we just don't know where it falls in that spectrum. And so, good job, Pat Verbeek, for sending potentially a text or sending an email or calling, or I don't know what he did, but asking about a player should not be headline worthy. Is that too bad? Is that a curmudgeonly take from me?
No.
Okay. Wow. I was expecting some pushback.
No
Like,
pushback.
I don't view Verbeek asking about Rantanen as noteworthy.
Yeah, I mean, we just don't know how far the conversation went. Like, did he ask and that was it? Did he put together a deal and was told no, Rantanen doesn't want to sign there? Like, how far did this go? And that's the context that's needed here.
It seems like Rantanen was fairly set on Dallas.
Yeah, I think it was Dallas and Florida were the two options.
Yeah, and I don't think... First off, I guess the Ducks have a Finn now in Ville Husso, but the Ducks don't have any star Finnish players.
No.
Which seems to hurt for Rantanen. Assuming, let's just play the hypothetical of Rantanen is willing to sign a contract with the Ducks. What do you think the Ducks package would have been, looking at what the Stars had to give up?
I mean, would you say that Zegras is a Stankoven equivalent?
Similar age. Zegras is a little bit older than Stankoven, but
Maybe slightly higher profile, but
I was thinking Lacombe.
I mean, yeah.
But yeah,
Probably.
Zegras is a good shout. Yeah.
That plus like 2 firsts, although maybe it's only 1 first because the Ducks' first will be higher.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
or make like someone in that range of that territory, whether it's Lacombe, whether it's Zegras, whether McTavish, plus probably the Ducks' next first. Maybe
And-
top 10, maybe top 5 protected or something like that.
And if you are the Ducks, if you are sitting in that chair and there's a possibility that Rantanen wants, like, he's willing to sign with you, do you pull that trigger? Do you make that deal?
It's so hard. It's so hard in that situation because on one hand, yes, you're getting the player, you're getting him, but part of me always will think, can we circle back on this in summer?
But knowing what you know about the Ducks' inability to get people in free agency, does that change your view?
It's hard. I don't know.
You have to answer. Yeah, I'm not letting you out.
Do
of
I
this.
have to?
Yeah, you do.
I
It's
think
hard is not an answer.
I think I'd probably do it.
Interesting. I am unsure.
Wow.
You think you probably would? I think I'd lean towards no. How about that?
Okay.
Just because I think that getting a star player is really important. Mikko Rantanen is that. And at some point the Ducks are going to have to bring in outside talent, but I'm not sure about giving up a prime young piece to do that. And this is what it really boils down to for me. I'm just not sure about Mikko Rantanen. Like that is the primary thing for
That's
me.
fair.
Is that if it was Mitch Marner, yes, because you can say whatever you want about Marner in the playoffs or whatever, but I have no questions about his game. Rantanen, I know he's a great goal scorer with Nathan McKinnon, and that's about it.
Yeah.
And defensively, he is not good. And I don't know. I'm not saying he's a bad player, and I think he makes sense for a Stars team where they're already a contender. They already have a system in place that he can just fit into. That's why I liked him for Carolina. He didn't like Carolina apparently, but anyway. So interesting thought. Ducks didn't do it. Let's talk about all the stuff that Verbeek said, because you had a lot to say to me in text about Verbeek's comments. You did.
Okay.
You were livid. I don't know if you remember this a week ago, but
I don't.
You were livid about what Pat Verbeek was saying, and I'll throw you some reminders.
Okay.
People did a good job. I'll give credit to Ducks and Pucks. Go check them out. I'll give them credit. They transcribed the entire Ducks migration event where Pat Verbeek is being interviewed by Brian Hayward, and I think that's probably where you get the best, most detailed comments. Is where Hayward is talking to, or is where Verbeek is talking to season ticket holders. And so I'll give you this one. He was asked about this season, his overall thoughts and the progression of the team. And he said this: if I'm looking at one particular thing, I think our team has made really good strides in our 5-on-5 play. Where we have to improve now, and it's difficult when your special teams don't perform. Even if our special teams were average, we would be in a much better position now. We would probably be 5 games better in our standings. It is huge for us now moving forward to continue to improve on our special teams. React.
Ugh.
I just threw you a bone. I just threw you red meat.
I mean,
well, he's not wrong. He's not wrong that if the Ducks had good special teams, they would be higher in the standings. Like that is an astute observation by Pat Verbeek.
Correct. Here's the issue though with that. Their 5-on-5 play from a process perspective is worse this year as compared to last year. Sure, the goals against are better. The goals for per 60 are better. But their overall, like offensively, I think they are generating, looking at it a little bit more, 2.35 expected goals per 60 as compared to 2.27 last season. The issue is defensively. They've gotten worse defensively at 5-on-5. They've gone from 2.71 down to 3.08. The biggest difference this season, and this is my frustration with this, and this is going back to the podcast that we did where you kind of took the stance of defending the Ducks, that type of stuff, taking the contrarian stance to kind of what you and I were both thinking at the time and feeling at the time. But the question of, okay, is Pat Verbeek really seeing this team and thinking, okay, they've improved, it's not just goaltending? And this quote is frustrating for me because it's not just for me personally, these numbers, it's the eye test. Like, this team does not, like, defend that well. Like, yes, they do okay in their own zone, but they have big breakdowns. They get stuck. They get stuck. And, like, the thing is, they're just bailed out by really good goaltending. And so I think what I find really frustrating with that quote is just maybe he's playing it up. Maybe he's playing it up to season ticket holders. There's that aspect of it.
Yeah.
But, like, I think that there is, for me personally, I want to see some honesty there of saying, yes, we've improved from our goal differential standpoint, but large portion of that is due to our goaltending, which has been outstanding this season. Now we need to get our guys playing better outside of that to support our goaltending. That is the better statement that I would want to see.
Yeah, I think what's hard is that he's saying, like, he's not going to come out and say our numbers are worse this year than last year.
Sure.
Not at the pancake breakfast, RIP pancake breakfast. Not at the migration event. Not to season ticket holders. But the one thing I wonder is just what is the basis for this comment? Because, like you said, let's just remove numbers, even though all numbers say that the Ducks are worse this year at 5-on-5, are not good at 5-on-5 this year. And this isn't just public data. This is like the Sport Logic data that the Ducks have access to. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. Maybe he's not looking at it from an analytical lens, which I wouldn't expect him to, being the hockey man that he is. Eye test level. The Ducks have had games where, yes, they look better, and they have little spurts where they look more competitive. Yeah. At the same time, though, there are still a lot of periods and stretches and almost entire games. If you look, this was said before the recent stretch of games where they have been outplayed and they have been completely dominated, and they're stuck in their zone, or they break down, or they're just not necessarily breaking down or having to defend too much, but they just can't generate dangerous offense. And so I think that I just wonder where he sees the strides.
I mean,
is
it's
my
this.
question. Like,
it's quite simply this. Last season, they were a minus 45 from a goal differential standpoint at 5-on-5. This season, they're minus 9.
Yeah. And I think that maybe it's coming from, well, now we're getting production, we're getting timely goal scoring from our kids, and, we're finding a way. I think that that's kind of been a theme in the recent games is we stay in games, we find a way, but I think that it's not something you can really live on.
At a certain point, if you're having to find a way to win every game, then you shouldn't be winning games.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah. That's the issue this team needs to be looking for repeatable success and how to have repeatable success. And I know it might be frustrating to hear us say this. And I know that people out there want to enjoy this team, and I get it. And so I'm sorry if we are a bit of a buzzkill.
Go ahead and enjoy. Yeah.
But I think what you have to remember with what we're talking about here is that we're largely talking about how this team can have long-term repeatable success. And I think having the general manager stating these types of things, I think can be problematic and can end up with this team becoming the Buffalo Sabres.
Yeah, I'll park the Sabres comp.
No,
just because the Sabres,
sure.
I mean, haven't even gotten this far. Like the Sabres are in a different kind of hell. So
they've been in the mix here and there.
Sure. I will say he is bang on with special teams, which is kind of funny, right? Because he's willing to pretty much throw special teams under the bus, but he is not. I guess you've got to point to something. And he is correct that the power play has not been good this season. I think it's looked a little bit better lately. That might be fair to say. But the penalty kill has, by and large, been bad this season. And I don't know what they're going to do about that. I mean, how many times can you change coaches before? Is it the players? I don't know what it is. But
yep.
Anyway, he also talked about the progression of the young players. And I think that what was interesting to me is he talked about how, for him, the magical age is 23. And he talked about Jackson Lacombe being 23, which he's not. He's 24, but I guess he was at some point.
He was 23 to start the season.
Yeah, he said he took a big step this year. Super excited for how good he's been this year. But I see more in him. Leo Carlson hasn't performed as well as he did last year, and that's because he is seeing tougher competition. And I think that that's an interesting point, because it's something that I've thought about a lot lately when I'm watching the Ducks' young players, where I'm trying to wrap my head around what I think about these players and evaluating their game. And I think that there's just this awkward age in the NHL life cycle between 20 to 22, 20 to 23, where the player is still just going to have these big swings up and down, and they're not really fully baked and ready to go until about 23. And so when I think of like a Mason McTavish, Leo Carlson, Cutter Gauthier, Zegras is 23 now, but these guys who it's like they're just not quite there yet. And as much as we want, and Minchikov and Zellweger are both 21, maybe we expected slightly too much of these players this year. just a touch. I think that there's still a lot of ways in which they could be helped out and amplified by the coaches, but I think that it's just a weird age range for players. Like you see a Colangelo at 23 look just like an NHLer. You see Jackson Lacombe look like that at 23, 24, and it's like, yeah, that's just kind of what happens.
Yep. I mean, 23, 24 is right when the prime starts to happen for these guys, and so it makes sense.
Yeah, and he also talked about how Nikita Nestorenko is going to be called up at some point this year, which I thought was interesting. He has played quite well for the Gulls this season. And then a gem of a quote. What? You don't even know what I'm about to say.
Yes, I do.
Do you?
I think so.
A gem of a quote. I didn't pick out the quotes you were probably thinking of. The mystery is over. The mystery is solved. Ian Moore. This is the quote.
Oh, okay.
Ian Moore.
Not the one I was thinking of.
As soon as his college season is over, he is going to be joining San Diego, and at some point he could play some games with us here in Anaheim. I don't know if he is just defensive minded. I don't think he's been allowed to be offensive minded at Harvard. So Ian Moore's coming, and Ian Moore is a right shot defenseman. So another defenseman to the logjam. I think just more than anything, we just know what's going to happen now with Ian Moore.
Yeah, because there was a whole lot of question mark of where he's going to go. And, I mean, it hit me, though, this week that that if Ian Moore was going to not sign with the Ducks, he would have just been traded.
Yeah,
like
they could have traded his rights.
We saw it with Henry Thrun. Like, they let him know, and so they moved him ahead of time. Like, that would have likely happened with Ian Moore. And so this is a good sign. Ian Moore is a prospect that I've been a fan of since the Ducks drafted him. Like, really kind of intriguing, larger right-hand shot defenseman that's mobile, is good with his stick. Kind of in the same mold as a Drew Hellison, right?
He's 6'3", 194, so he's bigger than Hellison. He has not produced much this season at Harvard, but there's a great prospect writer on Twitter called Gabriel Foley who does tracking data on prospects, and I don't know exactly how that sausage is made in terms of his model, but he did some tracking on Ian Moore, and Ian Moore grades out really well in terms of breakouts, in terms of zone entries, in terms of playmaking, shots on goal, and this is all just from this season at Harvard. And so just solid across the board. And at his size, that's another piece that the Ducks are going to be able to rely on. But my big question now is just, what are you going to do with all these defensemen?
Yeah.
I think Ian Moore will probably start out in San Diego next season. It seems like I wonder if he's going to make the jump straight to the NHL. He doesn't profile that way necessarily.
My bet is he probably gets NHL games this season.
Yes, but that's different than next year.
Yeah, to get him to sign the contract.
Yes, but I wonder about next season, and I just wonder what the Ducks are going to do this summer. Because right now, under contract for next season, you've got Jacob Trouba, who we all suspect will be extended this summer. You've got Radko Gudas, who's got one more year. After that, you've got Lacombe, you've got Drew Hellison, who's an RFA, Minchikov, Zellweger, and then down in San Diego, you have Tristan Luneau. So that's 7 defensemen right there. Like, something has to give, right? Is it just me, or like someone's gonna get traded this summer? Yeah. Your guess on who that would be?
I think Gudas.
Wow. 1 year
Gudas
captain
or Hellison. Well, honestly, it could be both Gudas and I think there could be a big trade that comes.
Yeah, I could see Hellison being packaged, and I could see Gudas just being swapped out. Just because it might just make sense. It also kind of feels like Trouba's taken over a bit of the captain role.
A little bit.
Like, just the vibe. Like, did you watch the Players Lounge episode with Edom interviewing
No, I haven't
Trouba?
yet.
It's really good. Emerson Edom did a fantastic job interviewing those three. It was Edom, Strome, and Vetrano, and there was just, to use the term, there was this aura about Trouba where it's like he's kind of like the adult in the room.
Yeah.
And I wonder if maybe that's all part of this. Okay. Last thing to really cover before we get into questions is the last bit of games, unless there was any other quote that you wanted to talk about.
The only other quote, this is the one I was yucking to, is the bridge deal one.
Oh yeah, I don't
That
even
was
want to talk about that.
It
But
was a
you can.
bad one.
Pat Verbeek's saying that he prefers bridge deals because it gives him a chance to evaluate the player, and I think that just having a hard line on yes or no bridge deal or long term is just a bad call.
Yep.
I
It
think
ends
that
up costing you as the GM more in the long term also.
there's a reason why so many teams are going away from bridge deals because they've realized, oh, we lock up the player now, we're going to get his best years at a discount from what he would get on the open market. And now you layer on top of that the rising salary cap and these deals that these young, pieces are signing for $8 million. I mean, that's going to look like a bargain,
Yeah.
and it already does look like a bargain based on their production, but it's only going to look more like a bargain. So I think generally you prefer to go long term with players. I think that there's a world where a bridge deal is fine, but I think just having this hard
Yeah.
line, bridge deals are better, is very problematic to me.
Agreed.
And it kind of goes in line with what you've said and what the criticism has been of Verbeek, where it's like, does he really fully care about leveraging the salary cap and just operating as a modern NHL GM? Maybe because he has so much cap space, he just hasn't had to care. But at some point, like, to build a sustainable Stanley Cup champion, you're going to have to navigate the salary cap and make
Yep.
complicated decisions. And at least the early indication is that Verbeek's philosophy and mentality towards the salary cap is not the most modern.
Agreed.
We'll leave it at that.
Yep. Agreed. And then talking about any of these games,
It's been a bad run.
yeah.
They did beat the Islanders.
They played well against the Islanders.
Yes, so I guess we'll lead with that. They beat the Islanders 4-1, and probably they're one of their best games of the season. I mean, they were really controlling the play offensively.
Yeah.
They just look like their ideal selves, where it's like, yes, they're going to play that Cronin hockey of pressuring the other team, but it's paired with some nice offensive outbursts. Sam Colangelo gets 2 goals, one being an empty netter. Mason McTavish gets a power play goal. Drew Hellison gets on the board. It was just a good night overall for the Ducks. Although I will say, the final 12 minutes were kind of a journey of the third period.
Oh, yeah, with the goalie pulled. And
What did you make of that, by the way?
I respected it, but also I'm like, what's happening here?
So for those who don't remember, Patrick Waugh pulled the goalie for the Islanders up down 3-0 with 12 minutes left in the game. And, you consider where the Islanders are battling for their playoff lives and, they're desperate. I get all that, but I think you probably need to wait a couple more minutes there.
Yeah.
Because if you score, then it's 3-1. I would say you give it 2 to 5 more minutes. I think 12 minutes is just, in a 3-0 game, is just way too early. If it's 2-0, I can kind of get it, because 3-0 isn't as big of a handicap, but 4-0 is like a death blow. And yet the Ducks still were kind of fighting it there at the end, but it felt more like a desperation play from the Islanders than it did the Ducks necessarily full on turtling.
Yeah. And actually, now thinking about the last time we did a podcast was not this past Monday, the Monday before. So the Ducks have played a decent amount of games. I mean, they beat the Oilers in a game where they really built off a 4-0 or 4-1 lead in the first period to take it. Really fun game overall, where the Ducks maybe had a little bit of the bounces go their way with some poor goaltending on the Oilers side. And then against the Canucks, they end up dropping that game in Vancouver with maybe a somewhat controversial goal for the game-winning goal, but
Controversial to some, but yes.
yes. And then lose the game against St. Louis at home. Like, these were 2 must-win games that the Ducks wanted to try to stay in this mix, and they dropped both of them. Like, that was the death knell.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at this stretch since we last did a podcast, they have the great win against the Oilers, which we did a post-game live stream for. I don't know if you remember hopping on for 2 minutes.
I did.
But actually, you were more like 10 minutes. But they win that game. Everybody feels good. They play great. And then they go into Vancouver and they lay an egg. And then they play St. Louis at home on a Friday and lay a total egg. They were not good in that game. Then they get the nice win against the Islanders. Vibes are back a little bit. And then they get just totally outplayed by the Capitals, unsurprisingly. Scoreline makes that game look a lot closer than it actually was. And that brings us to last night, where they lose against Utah 3-2. Not a great game from them. I don't really think they were ever that competitive in that game. And so if you look at the stretch of games, that this is 6 games now, 3 of which were against direct competitors in the standings, Vancouver, Utah, and St. Louis. And I think what's the most troubling thing is that those 3 games were their worst games of these last 6. The games where it's like everything's on the line, these are the games where it feels like they come up the shortest. And it's good. Like you're getting those meaningful reps. You're feeling what this is like. But I think it's just kind of telling that they just the style of play, the system that they have built up, it just doesn't really work when the chips are down.
Yeah, like that's just, and it's funny because the broadcast has even mentioned this. Like, this is a team that like does thrive off the rush, but Greg Cronin wants them, like you've mentioned, to have like a ground game, and it just feels like there's a complete mismatch there in terms of how they should be playing versus how they are playing. And it's just become evident. And then the other, I think, frustrating part is in the Utah game, like you look at the usage and like Cutter Gauthier played under 10 minutes in that game.
Yeah.
Like Mason McTavish was centering Isaac Lundestrom and Brett Leeson. Pavel Minchikov played like 13 minutes. And on the back end of back-to-back, when there was talk about how late they got in, like, why not using your full bench? Why are you playing Jackson Lacombe 28 minutes in that game? It just, a lot of oddities with how this team's roster is being managed currently from behind the bench, outside of even just discussing the tactics that are being used.
Well, it felt kind of like desperation, where it's like, okay, this is a must-win game. We're going to shorten the bench and go to the players who are giving us the most. And
which in the back end of back-to-back, like, that's not what you want to do.
I also just don't.
That out.
I also just don't think that the Ducks have the roster to do that. Like, if you have McDavid and Draisaitl or McKinnon, then yes, like, play them 30 minutes. Who cares? But the Ducks don't have that line that's going to go out and dominate. And I think what's weird too is that Cutter Gauthier and Sam Colangelo, who was a -2 last night, maybe that's why I only played 10:54. Like, they have been driving the bus offensively for this team. And like you said, on a night where you don't have necessarily your legs, it seems like you would want to give those guys more time because they have been giving you so much, and they're younger, they're fresher. Cutter Gauthier is a great skater. Like, it just makes sense to give those guys more. And instead, I mean, Greg Cronin leaned into just shortening the bench, going with that top 6. I think what was noteworthy is that he finally broke up the Strome, Vetrano, Terry line, and you saw a line of Strome at center with Zegras and Terry, and then you saw Vetrano with Carlson and Killorn. So it's a weird change because on one hand, I don't necessarily hate, like, Zegras, Terry, Strome is fine. I would prefer Zegras being the center there. But Killorn, Vetrano, Carlson, I don't really understand it. Like, Frank Vetrano is not the kind of, like, yes, he's got the shot, but he's not the kind of offensive player that you really want to pair up with Leo Carlson. I mean, I think he's a downgrade from what they had there prior. And then on top of that, like, if you want to switch things around, just put Cutter Gauthier there. Like, Cutter Gauthier is giving you some of the best offensive hockey of the season, and it just seemed like a great opportunity to put him with Leo Carlson. So, yeah, the Ducks kind of, again, this is a game where things look better on the scoreline than they actually were. They pick up a power play goal, and I think their first goal was a little fluky too. Was it the Trouba goal, or am I thinking of a different game? I know Killorn scored.
Yeah, Trouba was the Washington game.
Yeah, Killorn scored, and I mean, Utah was just the better team, and it was a weirdly managed game. Drew Hellison played 13 minutes. But I think that the nice thing about this recent stretch, at least, has been that Olin Zellweger has gotten to play. I mean, he's just gotten to play at all, so we'll take that. What have been your impressions of his game since coming back?
I think his first game, I think it was the game against the Blues, he looked like he was a bat out of hell in that game.
He played
Like,
20 minutes last night, to Cronin's
yeah,
credit, I guess.
he's definitely been used a bunch, but it feels like it's either him or Minchkov. Like, I feel like it's that, like, both can't thrive. It's either one or the other.
Yes. Yeah, it does feel like Zellweger's just replaced Dumoulin in the kind of hierarchy.
Yeah.
But he's looked great. I think that
Yeah.
last night he was not very good. He made a lot of mistakes, but I almost can't really fault him for that because he's just barely played. Like, he's barely gotten to have that rhythm and that consistency. And so mistakes in terms of timing, positioning, puck decisions, it's like if he's still doing that 10 games from now, then I'll be raising an eyebrow, but offensively he just brings a totally different dimension to this team. So yeah, any other, I mean, I guess we should talk about Sam Colangelo because he's scored, 4 goals in the last 6 games, something like that.
Something like that. I think he's looked good. I think he's definitely looked like an upgrade on Robbie Fabry on that line. Yeah, I've liked what he's brought.
Damning with faint praise.
Maybe.
Being better than Robbie Fabry is just not a huge compliment. I think he's been great. I think that last night he was not good, and maybe that's why he was barely played. I do think that on some levels you can see, like Oh, what were you gonna say?
No, I was just going to say, I think he's looked good at getting in on the forecheck. I think he's a nice compliment to Mason McTavish and Cutter Gauthier on that line.
Yeah, I think that there's limits to this hype where it's like, on one hand, I think he's got more offensive talent than I gave him credit for, but I think you can still kind of see where his game is a little bit limited. Like, he's just not the kind of skater that a Cutter Gauthier is, and so he can't necessarily be a true top 6 guy, but on a third line, he is perfect.
Yep.
Because he's responsible, he can shoot it, he can make plays. It's just a great success story for the Ducks.
I wonder, comparable right here, a little bit different of a player, but a player that the Ducks signed out of college and now has really found a niche with how he played in Nashville last year and now in Vancouver, but Kiefer Sherwood.
Yeah, I think Sherwood fills a similar archetype, but he's got more jam. He's just faster.
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
but I see the vision there.
Yeah.
I don't hate that.
Yeah.
Any other standout performances, either good or bad?
I thought Billy Husso looked good.
Yeah,
in his
good.
in his Ducks debut.
36 saves on 39 shots.
Goaltending just has not really been a large issue for this team.
No, regardless of who plays.
Yeah,
which is crazy. Yeah, I think here's my thing. The last few games, I think Mason McTavish has really struggled.
Okay,
and it's funny because last night he scored and it was a great goal, and that's where he should have been all season on the power play, but I'll leave that aside. But I still can't fully envision him as a second line center on a cup contending team because there are just nights, especially when the Ducks are playing a team like the Utah Hockey Club, who are really fast, or like the Capitals, where Mason McTavish just looks slow. Like, the pace to his game as a center is just not there. And I think this just furthers the notion that he should be a winger, because when he gets in on the forecheck, when he can protect the puck along the boards, or he can make plays from the half wall, he is great. And he can crash the net, he can tip pucks. He's got a great shot, and he's good off the rush, all of that. But as a center, having to skate all that ice from goal line to goal line, I just don't know. I'm unsure. He's got a lot of power in his stride, and he can be explosive, but he just looks. I wonder about him. In an ideal world, he's a winger and Zegras is a center, but we can't have nice things. Also, Zegras tried at Michigan.
Oh yeah,
against the Islanders. It was weird. Against the Islanders, I almost felt like he was playing like he was just screwing around. Like he was trying. He was trying stuff constantly. Like, he had a spinorama backhand pass. He tried at Michigan. I think he had a couple other plays like that. So yeah, he's looked good. Zegras has played really well the last few games.
All right. Want to get to questions? My throat is starting to kill me here. So let's get through some questions here. So we're going to start with our Patreon exclusive Discord. Go to patreon.com/crashthepond, where if you subscribe to us at the $2 tier, you get access to our Patreon exclusive Discord, and you get access to our podcast questions chat, which we are going to hit right now. So Shake and Wings asks, is Bedard a generational talent like Crosby and McDavid?
No.
Interesting. I think yes still.
No, he's not.
We'll see.
He's not. No, he's not on that level.
D Frenzy said
Sidney Crosby at 100 points as a rookie.
You guys kind of talked about this already with both the Ducks in a playoff race. Is this recent success ultimately detrimental to the Ducks' long-term future, specifically if it causes this coaching staff and Cronin especially to be re-signed?
That is a question for you.
I think if what they're saying about this current season, if what Pat Verbeek has said, that he has viewed it as this big step, I think ultimately it could be detrimental, because if they buy in, go all in on this, and then they end up just playing like this next season but don't get the goaltending, like, I think that is detrimental, because they end up being in a worse spot next season. I think if he's able to realize this and add players that improve this team around that, make a new coaching decision, things like that, like, it could just be a nothing overall. And it could be a good thing for the players to have experienced this, basically. So,
Yeah.
unclear. We'll know more come the offseason, though. But there is the potential for that. Andy Mion said, I know trades between the Kings and Ducks are rare, but if you had a chance to get Brant Clark, what would you offer for him? And without looking at what was the last trade between Anaheim and LA?
I have no clue. I could not tell you when that last trade was.
Was it Sean O'Donnell?
I don't know.
Was it Sean O'Donnell for J.S. Oban?
Well, I would offer Radko Gudas. How about that? Or Jacob Trouba for Brant Clark. Gently used Jacob Trouba and Radko Gudas.
Let's see.
Brant Clark's not even playing for the Kings right now.
Let's see. I'm now curious. All-time Ducks history of Ducks trades. Can you sort by teams that they traded to? No. Okay, that would take way too long to find. Okay, so I'll come back to that, maybe find that at some point. Hardcore Lucha said, if Cronin isn't the coach, Seneca comes up and everything else remains the same, how many 30-goal scorers do the Ducks have at the end of next year? So basically, Cronin is not the coach, Seneca is on the Ducks, and everything else remains the same. How many 30-goal scorers do the Ducks have?
Maybe one? Terry?
One or two.
Yeah. I don't think anyone's scoring 30 outside of Terry.
Yeah. Maybe Vetrano gets there again.
No.
Maybe McTavish hits it eventually. I don't know. Brad said 2 questions. One, people talk about the Ducks being cup contenders, yet right now they're mediocre. What turns this team around? Is it just the guys on the roster and Seneca developing, or does something else need to happen? And then the second question is, with the team struggling under Cronin, what ultimately happens? Does he get fired after a couple more years of mediocrity? So, to question 1, I think it's just development of these young guys, plus an addition of a higher end player for the forwards.
Yeah, if you look at all the rebuilds, at some point you need to bring in outside help. Like, it's very hard to get all the way there purely on the strength of your drafted talent. So yeah, at some point you have to go out and add to this mix. Now, maybe that's not a superstar. Maybe that's just like a really, really good middle six guy or something, but you do need to do that. And in Pat Verbeek's mind, that might be Jacob Trouba.
Yeah, probably. On the question about Cronin and the team struggling, like, I think to this management group, they're not struggling. So, like, I think
he'll be back next year.
I think it will require a really bad start to the season for him to get fired mid-season next season.
I think that if they miss the playoffs next year, he's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ron Cosmo said, I know Felix is a Canadiens fan, and I get the sense he was before he became a Ducks fan. So I know Felix is a Canadian fan. I get the sense he was before he became a Ducks fan. How did you end up becoming a Ducks fan? If all the Ducks played, if the Ducks played the Habs in the finals, who would you root for? So I mean, you are just a Canadiens fan. You are not a Ducks fan at all.
I get asked this question a lot. Like, oh, so you're a Ducks fan, and I don't like it's weird because I have a lot of attachment to the team doing this podcast for so many years, but I don't cheer for the team to win. Like it doesn't do anything for me when they win a game. Maybe that'll be different if this team ever makes the playoffs. But like I do, like I get excited for the success of the young players and like seeing you and like other people I know happy. Like it brings me joy. But like I live and die with the Canadians. Like wins and losses are really like it's like a normal fan. So if there was a Habs Ducks final, I would easily root for the Habs without any second thought.
Yeah. Storm Eagle said, if you could choose between making a coaching change or training a defenseman, what would you do? Coaching change. Easy.
Yes.
Yeah. Malarkey said, what is the max AAV you offer Marner? Do you even approach 14 mil?
20. Go
I think,
2
yeah.
years. 2 years, 20 mil.
I think you approach 14. Ducks have
Why
so
not?
much cap space.
Why not? Who cares?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like it does not matter.
D Frenzy said, want both your opinions on this. Would you rather have this year's top 3 rookies, Celebrini, Michkov, Hudson, or last year's top 3, Bedard, Fantilli, Carlson? Separately, who are your top 3 out of those 6?
God, that is a great. So I was at a Sharks game when I saw this pop up, and I showed this to my friend, and we actually had a debate about this. I'm curious who your pick is.
I think Celebrini. I still like Bedard a lot. I'll probably go. I think I'd go Bedard 1, Celebrini 2.
No, but of the 3, so you have to pick one of the groupings. Yeah.
I'll probably go last year's.
Okay. I will go with this year's.
Interesting.
It's hard though. I just really like Celebrini.
I do too.
But in terms of ranking them, I mean, it's Celebrini and Bedard are in that top 3.
Yeah. I don't know who I have as 3. Hudson's different because he is a bit older, right?
Yeah, but he's also 5'8". Yeah.
No, sure.
Yeah. Like
but a little bit different than the rest of that group.
Yeah, I think that in 5 years, Fantilli and Carlson are going to look totally different. I think the question is just how you rate Michkov versus the other forwards.
Yeah. I think it's just very much an unknown. I think who would third be?
I also just don't like. You know what? I'll say Celebrini, Bedard, and Hudson, but only because these are the players I've actually watched. Like I've watched Leo Carlson, and I have different thoughts about him. But like I got asked the other day, like Fantilli or Carlson. I'm like, I just don't watch enough. I don't watch Blue Jackets games. I can't tell you my opinion. Like if I'm gonna have this opinion on Carlson, then I'm not gonna just have an opinion on Fantilli if I don't ever watch him play. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Our good friend Genius Jack said, how much more AAV will the Ducks have to offer Marner to convince him to come to Anaheim? 2 to 3 million more than what contending teams are offering?
Well, whatever the offset is in terms of the tax difference, start there. And then the tax of being a bad team. So, yeah, 2 to 3 million sounds about right.
Yeah, I'd agree. Brad said, assuming we don't pick someone from outside, thoughts on these 4 lines? Zegras, Carlson, or thoughts on these 4 lines?
That's a little confusingly. So
yeah.
Zegras, Carlson, Terry. Okay, Zegras, Carlson, Terry.
McTavish, Gauthier, Colangelo, Seneca, Killorn, Vetrano, and then Mishak, Strome, Harkins.
I like it. I also like Gauthier at center. I feel like that I'm more open to him being a center now after seeing him this season than I was last year. So, yes, I like the idea there.
Lisa asked, what has been your favorite moment of the season so far?
Before we get into that, there was a quote by Verbeek saying that his target this summer was another top 6 forward. I think, did he say right shooting?
I wouldn't be shocked.
I feel like he may have learned from last year to not be too detailed about what he wants because people freaked out when it didn't happen, and rightfully so. Favorite moment of the season? I don't know. What is my favorite moment? What is yours?
I'm trying to think what my favorite moment is. I think maybe the home game against the Red Wings. That was a fun
friends
game.
We made along the way.
I'm gonna go with that game.
My favorite moment, it's not really a moment. but it's more just those little moments where you see a young player improving. And I think for me, all of Cutter Gauthier's season has just been a blast to follow.
Jackson Lacomb's season.
Yeah,
also.
Jackson Lacomb's probably the obvious one. But yeah, like that's what's been the most fun. But I don't have a single moment, no.
Yeah, Shaking said, do the Ducks sign Gudas to a contract extension before any of the young players get an extension? I mean, that would be peak Verbeek.
Peaky Verbeek. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah. Brad said, just heard on 32 Thoughts that the Canucks might have been looking for a first for Besser. Should the Ducks have done that even if the pick wasn't protected? No.
Because he's a rental.
Yep. Not
Unless you're getting him on an extension.
Yeah. Which even then, wait till summer.
Mm-hmm.
Besser is not like a Rantanen where you consider it to get him locked up. Charbonneau said, why do you guys think the Ducks struggle to acquire big-name free agents? Seems like an ideal spot, amazing weather, lots to do, and the players can lay low here with little media on them.
I think it's just that the team isn't good.
Yeah.
And players want to go where they can win.
Well, also, I just don't think there have been very many big-name free agents, to be honest.
Also, it's a little bit of a misconception because the Ducks have gotten free agents like Strome, Vetrano, Gudas. But those are guys who Killorn, they were paid for Killorn, but it's not like players aren't coming at all.
Yeah.
So
well, that's my thing is I don't think there are necessarily big name free agents in hockey. Like the big players typically sign extensions.
Well, last year it was Stamkos and Marchessault.
Yeah. But that's fair. I'll leave it
like
at that.
They whiffed.
Yeah. Blobbyhead person said, what are the attributes of this roster that you think makes them good at rush opportunities, and why do you think the roster isn't good as possession focused offense? Is it individual skills, play style, teammates, etc.?
Well, just look at the players. I mean, Cutter Gauthier, look at all his goals. They're always on the rush. Look at Leo Carlsson's scoring chances. They're always on the rush. Look at Trevor Zegras' best moments, often on the rush. Look at Mason McTavish's best moments, often on the rush. And so there is a track record of them playing well, but also it's just their skill sets. Like they have great hands, they have great vision, they have great shots. Troy Terry, hell, look at Troy Terry's track record. I mean, go back to that 37 goal season. Like he is dynamite off the rush. I feel like that's kind of been lost this season.
This is just a team that is built to be on the rush, and I just don't think they are a team that's meant to be on the walls. That's to find space.
I also just don't think it's one or the other. Like, the game is fluid. You're going to end up in situations where you're going to have to pick a puck up off the wall and work it on the cycle. But I think that you've got to do things to bring out those rush opportunities more. And, I mean, Greg Crone has outright said he doesn't want that. So,
Yep.
Ending
me on, this is an interesting question, actually. Overall, do you think the quality of the roster is better or worse than where the team is in the standings?
Well, that's the funny thing, is that they're not actually that high in the standings.
But they're about 500.
Yeah, but it's where they are in the standings, though.
Yeah, fair. I just meant point, like, if the season ended today, they would finish, like, with what, like 80 points, 81 points, something like that?
They are 26th in the NHL, just on raw points. If you look at points percentage, where are they at? They are 26th. So I think they are better than that.
I think they are too.
I think the roster is better than where they have. I mean, the Calgary Flames are 17th. Like, they have some good players in the roster. Dustin Wolf might be in the Vezina conversation, but I think that the Ducks should have enough talent to be higher in the standings. Yes.
Yeah. Drake Duquesne said, if Zegras has another season like this one in 2026, what does his next contract look like?
I mean, that is a great question. Another bridge, like a 1-year deal. Is that the situation there?
Yeah.
I think that if this is what happens to him again, then I think he's just going to do another short-term contract. Because why would you lock yourself in now when you haven't had a breakout season? I mean, he's going to be a UFA in 2028. So yeah, he really has 1 year at that point to show that he's more than a 40-point guy.
Yep. Olaf is Berserker said, looking back to what your expectations were to start the season, where do you think this team has overperformed? Where have they underperformed?
They have underperformed at 5-on-5 relative to my expectations. They have not necessarily underperformed on special teams because I did not think they were good before, but they continue to be bad. They have overperformed in net. I mean,
Yep.
I knew Dostal was great, but I didn't think we'd get this from Gibson. And then there are some individual players who have overperformed, like a Lacombe,
Yep.
etc. But yeah, it's a mixed bag.
I'd say the general manager has underperformed also.
Wow,
I think
Herman Traff not doing it for you.
I just think bringing in Trouba and that logjam really was not beneficial to this team long term.
I mean, hell, even the Dumoulin signing, arguably.
The trade to get him.
Yeah, I think maybe it would have been fine if you had traded Fowler like right away.
Yeah.
Fowler probably should have never started the season with the Ducks. In an ideal world, he would never have played
Correct.
a game for the Ducks this season.
Yeah.
And I wondered the extent to which they tried to trade him this summer. Because if you're Cam Fowler, wouldn't you prefer that? Like you can kind of know, okay, I'm going to start in
Yeah.
a different city. I can kind of plan my life around that. So I don't know. I don't know what the timing of that was because it seems like it all kind of came up at training camp. So it's like that Pat Verbeek just not contact Cam Fowler all summer. I don't know.
Yeah. No clue. My throat is starting to kill me, so I think that this is probably going to do it for questions, folks. Sorry for everyone in Twitch and YouTube and Twitter and Blue Sky, but we'll limit it to Patreon tonight.
Yeah, and that is the benefit of Patreon. So on the rare instances where Jake's throat is not throating, you can still get your questions answered. But yeah, thank you for listening, everyone. A busy week, a busy last couple weeks really for the Ducks, and now we're entering the stretch run. The Ducks have 20-ish games left, 24 games left. What are your predictions for this final stretch? What are we going to see, and what are we looking for here?
I mean, I'm just hoping this is my overall view for the team is that
You just hope Trevor Zegras has fun, like the sign.
Sure. I want this team to win games where they play well. And I think if they don't play well in those games, I don't want to see them get rewarded with wins. Because I think that is not exactly what should happen. I think that they need to find their way to play games more like they did against the Islanders and not play games like they did against the Capitals or against Utah.
That take's not going to make you many friends.
Is it that controversial to say I want this team to play well?
Well, saying that you want them to lose games where they don't deserve to win.
Well, I just think that it's not like I think if they play poorly, they should not win games.
Well, yeah, I think that what's happened is that they've won a lot of games where they don't deserve to win, and that has clouded the team's judgment.
Correct.
And I think that the last few games we've actually seen that kind of reverse where they're not getting those breaks. And I mean, I think it's a good thing. Like this is like I agree with you. Like they need to kind of have a reality check of what they are. I am now fascinated to see Ian Moore.
Yeah.
Also, like it's just crazy to me that Pat Verbeek thinks they've made stride just because they have a minus 26 goal differential. Like that is a pretty basic stat, and they are down there with some not good teams in that respect. So what I'm looking for in down the stretch is just progression of the youth. I mean, this is the time to really evaluate. Know what you have. Go into the summer having a really solid understanding of all your players, whether you're going to trade them, keep them. So I'm looking with a pretty close eye to players like McTavish, Zegras, Gauthier, Carlson, down the list. Like these are the building blocks, whether that be in a trade or keeping them. So that's what I'm going to be looking for. Also, Ian Moore. I will be looking out for Ian Moore. On that note, this is a great show. If you want to support the podcast and keep this thing going, there's a great way to do that. Number one is check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/crashthepond. For $2 a month, you get access to our patrons-only Discord server where you can chat with Jake and I about the Ducks and hockey any time of the day. Jake works at like 2 a.m., so if you're a night owl, you can talk to him then.
Hopefully not normally I do that, but sometimes
you can also upgrade that pledge to $7, $7.50 a month, and you get access to 2 bonus podcasts, and you also get access to player video breakdowns. So right now there's a couple up on Sam Colangelo and Leo Carlson, so go check that out. You can also, and that's all at patreon.com/crashthepond. You can also leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. We're also on Spotify. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Like this video if you're watching on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel. Find us on all social media. We're on Blue Sky, Twitter, all of that. On that note, thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.